Winship, and we're talking today about ambivalence. Now, I want to go back to a couple of things that Rachel said before we get started. One is I will be sending her a copy of the PowerPoint after this. So if there's things that seem really important to you, useful, don't worry if you don't need to take notes, because you will have a copy of the PowerPoint that will be sent to you. The second thing is that I'm stopping at least twice during the presentation and once afterwards, just to get your feedback, not only feedback, but really ideas in terms of what else works in the situation. Because really what I think can be important is for people to be able to share what they've found that works some of the time, which is as much as anything ever works. And then share those with other people. It's a really safe forum for doing this, because obviously it's not your voice. You type things in. Rachel will pass that on either in terms of a question or a suggestion, and it's just a way to let other people know your questions and to let other people know what you found out that works. So this is on ambivalence. And ambivalence is, I really like that. Rachel had put this name tag on the screen. It's really talking about indecision, about not being able to decide which way to go, what to do, how to move from where you are at this point in time. And it's pretty universal. All of us are ambivalent about some things. I just finished reading an audiobook, Walter Isaacson's book about Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs was a pretty amazing guy. I mean, really screwed up in some ways, but a pretty amazing guy. The first big house that he owned after he became rich had almost no furniture in it. He couldn't, because deciding on a couch was just too complicated. I mean, this was a guy for whom details were incredibly important. And so you had this house that was essentially bare. And he was an amazing guy. What you see on the screen is thanks to Steve Jobs. We had the personal computer, the Apple II, which was the first computer that people took home in their house. We had the Macintosh, which led to being able to display graphics and video on a computer screen. The iPod, the iPhone, and if people have an iPhone or a phone that was designed to copy the iPhone. That's essentially what all the smartphones are. iPad, really, really brilliant guy. And once he made a decision, he moved forward and he designed and built a company that could move forward with pretty amazing speed to get things to market. But I think, but ambivalence is real. So what we're going to do with this webinar is we're going to look at the concept of ambivalence, and which comes from motivational interviewing, and look at ways to encourage ambivalence and then move beyond ambivalence in the context of stages of change. And I hope what that is will make sense in the next few minutes, and then talk about in the broader sense about how to help clients who are stuck. And we're putting this in the context of case management. So if you're in a shelter and you're helping clients to work a program so that they've got more independence when they leave, if you're in a transitional housing program in which clients are in need to be in a plan change process, if you're working in Pathway of Hope, or really essentially anywhere in which you're doing more than emergency assistance, you're really working on helping people get from point A, which is not good in some ways, shape, or form, to a point B or a point C. And this really comes from motivational interviewing, the concept of ambivalence, and then most of, but not all of the specifics that I'll be talking about afterwards. So motivational interviewing, developed in the 1980s by William Miller and Stephen Rolnick, really became more popular and widespread by the mid-90s, early 2000s. And it was initially focused on problem drinkers in outpatient settings. So what can we help people who are coming in? They're not inpatient, but they're coming in, they're working on the issue, their alcoholism, their addiction over a period of time. And since then, it's been used more recently in a variety of settings to promote behavior change. And so it has been applied with case management as well. And according to motivational interviewing, ambivalence can be resolved by working with your client's intrinsic motivations and values. Motivational interesting is interesting. It's not directive. I mean, it's not non-directive. It is a very directive approach, but essentially directive in trying to help people get in touch with their own motivations, values, what's important to them, and then how to move forward. When I think about the value of self-determination, one violates self-determination by telling a client, you ought to do this. This is the road you ought to take. This is the path for you. This is the program for you. Except if someone's in crisis, traumatized by a disaster, that's different. But most of the time, it's different. What motivational interviewing is not to say one needs to do X, but one can just help you move. And this really is tied in with the stages of change. And so we'll be employing that in a couple of areas in that as we move through this presentation. So let's start with pre-contemplation. One of the things about the stages of change, terms where it starts with pre-contemplation, from contemplation, pre-contemplation, there's not an issue. Contemplation, maybe I ought to do something about it. Preparation is planning on that. Goal setting would fit into that. Action would be trying to implement those goals. Maintenance, maintaining stability, and often the case of relapse, going back and then picking up the pieces and moving ahead again. So if we start with pre-contemplation, and pre-contemplation was really one of the powerful things about the stages of change. The idea that if people don't see a problem, then trying to get them to work a program is not going to be useful. I mean, fewer insurance companies will pay for 30-day inpatient treatment for people with substance abuse issues. And a lot of that because a large number of those people did the 30 days, went through detox, went through therapy, were successfully discharged, and then stopped on a bar on the way home because they really didn't think it was an issue. It wasn't a concern. They were still in pre-contemplation, and going to a program where you're in pre-contemplation is really a recipe for it's not going to work. So here's pre-contemplation, right? And this is from the addictions field. I don't really have a problem. The other place where we see it in the work that we do is in this sense of being stuck in the eternal present. Life isn't good. Life hasn't been good in the past. It ain't going to get any better in the future. And the person just saying that they don't see how getting involved in this program, how trying to take these steps, it's not really going to make any difference, okay? So that's pre-contemplation. And that sense of indecision, ambivalence, stuck, it can be a problem for the clients we work with. Now, I'm going to pause for just a second because this is the difference between, I think, doing case management and some people who are doing therapy. So let's assume, and I don't think it's the case, but let's assume that any one of you came into a trust fund at the age of 21 or 25, and you've got between $10,000 to $15,000 that comes in every month, right? This is money that your grandfather, who was filthy rich, left you when he died. So you don't need to work. You'll never need to work for the rest of your life. And you go see a therapist, And the therapist really talks about, okay, about how to help you move from where you are, which you're really not doing much. You're, you know, you're a little bored. You really can't figure out what you want to do. Everything seems like it's too much work. And if you're working with a therapist on that and just decide, this is good enough. Then from the therapist's point of view, okay, this is good enough, right? You've got 10 to 15 grand coming in a month, you're going to be okay. You may be a little unhappy, but that's the way it is. Now, the clients that come in to the programs of the Salvation Army are not in that situation, right? Life isn't working. And so the idea of what can we do when those folks are stuck, when they don't really see that what they're doing is getting in the way that much. What can we do? Because in a way, ambivalence, indecision about do I do one thing or do another, that's preferable to I don't have a problem or I'm stuck. So really what you're trying to do in the pre-contemplation stage is you want to encourage that ambivalence. You want to help people to be in that situation of I don't know what to do. Because I don't know what to do is different than I'm not going to do anything, or I'm not doing anything, or why bother doing anything. Okay? So and so the goal is perhaps, possibly, maybe I could, yeah, maybe this would be, maybe I could get this job, maybe we could do different kind of housing, etc. It's still kind of off in the future, but it's possible. Maybe I could do that, maybe I can't, I don't know. There is a saying from the Middle East, you know, that once the camel's nose goes under the tent, the rest of the camel will follow. Once people tend to think about maybe I could do something, then there's a chance that the rest will follow. So then the goal is moving toward contemplation or preparation, right? Moving toward contemplation and then preparation. Let me think about that and then moving towards setting goals on how to do that. So the question is, you know, how do we help a client to move in this direction? And I really want to start with the things that don't work. So what does not work? Well, one traditional approach is the belief that change is motivated by discomfort. If you can make people feel bad enough about it, they will change. There was a TV show that was done on interventions. That idea of everybody coming in and getting together and doing that. And the research on interventions is not encouraging. Obviously, it works sometimes. It doesn't work a whole lot of time. And some of it just depends on how stuck the person is, and then and really how well the people do it. But making people feel bad does not necessarily lead to change. The concept of hitting bottom is one that has absolutely no support in the research literature. And part of it is because hitting bottom is such a vague phrase, right? One person's bottom is different than another person's bottom. And as one guy who was in recovery said, you know, I thought I'd hit bottom and then I realized I was standing on a trap door and could go much farther to go down. And many people don't hit bottom before they make a change. Change happens for any number of reasons. So that's a traditional approach that doesn't work real well. And the idea people don't change if they haven't suffered enough. No, people change for all kinds of reasons. Second traditional approach is you better or else. If the stick is big enough, there's no need for a carrot. Someone goes into treatment because a boss or sees a a social worker or therapist or someone because a boss or a spouse says you either do that or else. And that occasionally will work, but it certainly doesn't engender any intrinsic or inner motivation. And the third approach is labeling denial. The idea that someone who persists with behavior that seems to an outside observer to be destructive or negative is in denial. And when you work with those in denial, then you do direct confrontation. Direct confrontation often doesn't work. And the reason is that as soon as somebody feels attacked, the defenses go up. And most of us who feel attacked will respond back with anger, and that's not a start for a productive working relationship, okay? And besides, denial is a label, and it's a label that may be used to describe a very complicated situation. So what else is not useful at this point? One, and this will come up later, a decision balance worksheet. This also comes from motivational interviewing. The really good news about that is that when people have a behavior, is you say, what are the good, so there's this behavior, this thing you want to change. That may have to do with work. It may have to do with the way you treat somebody. It may have to do with something. So this is what you're doing. And so what's the good news? What's the payoff? What do you like about it? And what are the not so good news things about that? And what would be good about changing that? And what would not be good about changing that? It's a good thing to use. I'll bring it back later. But if somebody's in pre-contemplation, it's not going to make any sense, because the good thing about changing behavior, I don't really want to change behavior. Why should I write good things about that? The not so good things about what I'm doing now, I think it's pretty much okay. I'm not going to do that. So that really doesn't work very well. So here's where I want to stop, and the first time I'm going to ask questions. So for those of you who are out there, in your experience of working with people who are having trouble getting started, right? What have you seen that doesn't work, that's not useful in helping them take those first steps? So I'm going to stop and let people think, and the hope is that some people write some things in, and then Rachel can repeat those.
All right, we've got one. Do you want me to read them yet, or do you want to wait?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, actually a couple now. First is using threats.
Yes. Yeah, threats don't work well. Yeah.
Another response is asking where they would like you to start. You almost have to put at least 3 options out in order to get the thinking process started.
Yeah, right. Asking that as an open-ended question is not likely to work, because I don't know. Right. Open-ended questions work really well on some things, and not so well on others. And I think this is one of those situations. I think that idea of providing options really can work, because one, it's going back to what I said earlier about self-determination. You're not saying this is the road to take, this is the option to take, but here's some options, here are some possibilities. Is that all that have come in, Rachel?
Yep, that's all we've got for now.
Okay. Okay. If people think of more later, but what I'd like to do is
You
to.
have one more if you want it yet. Sorry,
Yes,
it came in at
yep.
moving forward too fast.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And moving forward too fast. And I think sometimes the moving forward too fast is when you assume that people have more energy or more motivation than you think, or you think they've got, more skills and resources and strengths than you do, and so it can, and so that can backfire. That can backfire. One of the things that really not present in this presentation, but the advantage of not moving that fast, and is that if people have a number of, if there's some very initial things they can do, maybe goals haven't been set, but there's just things they can do. Someone gets into a transitional housing program, and in the first couple of weeks, they need to get on the list for permanent housing or housing assistance, right? Because the list can be anywhere from 8 months to 28 months long. And so you need to do that just as soon as possible. And you can do some little things. And even though the person's maybe pretty much stuck at that point, there's a little bit of a sense of momentum, right? You were able to do this. That's really good. You're able to do this. And then that can be useful heading forward. Okay. So what else doesn't work? Labeling. I mean, denial is a label that can mean anything and anything. I don't care for labels. Alcoholic, schizophrenic, partly because the label has the impression gives the impression that this is who this person is, instead of the complexity of a person who struggles with alcohol, a person with severe and persistent mental health issues. Blaming, as somebody said, blaming and threatening, and then the expert trap. The expert trap is, well, I've worked with a lot of people and I know what works in this situation. That's not going to work. The person's not being treated as an individual. And they're really being talked to rather than talked with. I'm taking sides. Yes, my family, my mother, someone else says I should be doing this, but I'm not sure. And so you don't want to take sides. So really, if the idea is how to move beyond ambivalence, because as I was talking about earlier, that ambivalence is preferable to being stuck. But when people get into contemplation, the state of contemplation on the stages of change, it's that I'm thinking about doing this and I'm not sure, right? That indecision could go either way. So how do you go past that? And so here are some approaches in terms of helping people from contemplation to preparation. So you can nurture ambivalence by developing discrepancies between current behavior and ideal, between the current behavior and the ideal and desired behavior, between current behavior and how that differs from being able to reach desired goals. I said earlier that confrontation doesn't work often. Challenging someone is really a softer kind of, is softer than confrontation, right? Challenging often goes under the help me understand, a discrepancy between one thing and the other. I used to do groups with men who battered, who had been arrested for domestic abuse. They were assigned to this 60-hour, really good 60-hour treatment program, 15 weeks, 2 2-hour sessions a week. And And as we got to know people, we could challenge the version of events that they came in with. We didn't want to do that at first because you need to know someone. There has to be some kind of a working professional relationship before you can really challenge. But, about week 5 or 7, when we were talking of things, and if somebody brought up that thing, I got home, it was Friday night, I'd been drinking a little bit, and my wife was upset because I was supposed to come home earlier, and she started yelling at me, and I yelled back, and I pushed her, and she fell down and hurt her head. Okay, that's the version. I had the police report. I'd read the police report. I knew the extent of her injuries. And so you could say, help me understand. You said you pushed her and she fell, and the police report lists all these places where there were bruises. Help me understand. And so I think that when there is that relationship, that is possible, but you need to understand what's important and valued to the client, because you're trying to state the behavior in terms of something that's different and something that's important. And the idea with that is that it's not just an answer, but it's helping people to think about what they do and how they do it in a way that's different. So I put one example up there that you can see. It's a good question. And the answer to that may lead somewhere in terms of the individual deciding that something else needs to be done. The term in this from psychology is cognitive dissonance. Dissonance is, I think, really comes out of sound, out of music. A dissonance is a jarring sound, something that's really off key. To create a real disconnect, so people will see that between where they are and where they want to be. And so then what can I do in order to make those closer than they are now? There's a concept of change talk, which I think is one of the most powerful things that comes out of motivational interviewing. So change talk refers to words that the client speaks. So you're listening to the client. Language that conveys a person's desire, ability, reasons, need, or commitment to change. And put those in the acronym of DARN. Desire to change. I want this, I prefer it, I wished it. The ability, I'm able, I can, I could. The reasons to do it. And the need, that it's important. Have to, need to, got to. Statements that indicate a need or willingness to change a behavior. There are concerns about the status quo, about what's going on now. I'm worried if I don't do something soon. About the advantages of change. Things would be better if I did that. About the optimism of changing. I know I can do this. About the intention to change. I'm going to do this because, right? So you're kind of listening for those, and goal setting. I'd like to improve my this or that. And then there's some questions that can evoke that. So the questions, and this kind of questions that then people may talk about. What worries you about something that's going on now? How would you like things to be different and better? What makes you think you could do it? And what would you be willing to do? And at that point, you're really talking about the, about preparation, moving into action. In terms of responding to change talk, there's several things people can do. And one is just elaborating. Somebody says something. I was doing a 3-day workshop in August of this year down in East Tennessee with women who were in recovery, heroin and meth and alcohol, and really helping them tell their stories. And one person talked about, getting jailed for 7 days for failing yet again another drug test. And she said, I was just lying there in the bunk and I said, I'm tired of being in the system. So one of the questions was, so what does it mean to be in the system? Right? You're asking people just to explain that a little bit more. So they're telling you, but at the same time, they're also telling themselves as they think about it through. About reflecting change talk. And we'll get to that in just a minute. And then just summarizing, because I think summarizing can really help. So you said that that you think you could do this, that because this and this are happening, that then this would be possible, right? And so so you're summarizing and putting together the things that people have said. So I want to go back to the second one, to the reflecting. And then, I'm sorry, I'm going a little ahead of myself. And then affirming the change talk. The last thing with there is just to say, and again, this comes when you know someone a little bit well enough to say, wow, that's really neat. I mean, I hear you say that, and it's clear that you're moving in the right direction. So you're affirming that. So when we think about reflections, reflections is a way of showing interest in what the person has to say and respect for his or her desires and wishes. It's a statement that makes a guess as to what the person means. And I've taught social work for a long time. I was putting stuff together for this, and I came across this description of reflections. It's a statement that makes a guess as to what a person means, and it's really the best thing I've ever read on that, right? I hear someone say something, I give them what I think that is back, and I'm guessing. And it's non-threatening, because you're really just talking about the person's words or maybe what was behind their words. And it can really help the client understand himself or herself. And one of the reasons why I think reflections are really powerful is that two good things can happen when you do reflections, when you reflect back. One, you may be right? You may find out if your guesses as to what the client said or meant to communicate, if they're accurate. And if they're accurate, that's good. And if they're not, that's good too, because the client will say, no, that's not what I meant. And will tell you what she or he meant to say. And the second thing is that you're communicating in a way that trying to understand what the client is saying is important to you, right? That you're listening and you're putting some energy and effort into understanding that. And I think that itself, regardless of the content of what the person is saying, is important in the client thinking this is somebody who is in my corner, somebody who wants me to be able to do better or to do well. So in terms of types of reflections, there's simple reflections, amplified, double-sided. And simple reflections, one way is that you're repeating or restating some or all of the same words. Yeah, I didn't get to work 3 days last week because of car trouble. So you're saying that the reason that your work attendance wasn't good last week was because the car wouldn't start, or the car just was not functioning. Right. So you're doing a little clarifying, but it's more or less the same words. Similar words, but in a slightly different way. My kids just got to me so much that I just couldn't go anywhere, much less make this meeting. Okay, so so being overwhelmed with the children was the reason that you weren't there, that you didn't come, right? Slightly different way, fewer of the words. And then there's a paraphrase that captures meaning and feelings, perhaps adding something implied but not stated. And often is when you're reflecting feelings as well. So in that last example that I gave, it's that thing, so you're really feeling overwhelmed with everything going on in your house and with your kids, and that really stopped you in your tracks, or led to you not coming here, right? When you may add a feeling component of that. Sounds like you were really tired when all that was going on. Amplified reflection. I'm putting this in because it's one of those pieces from motivational interviewing. So I'm going to describe it, and then I want to talk about difficulties with that. It's amplified or exaggerated without sarcasm. My drinking doesn't really get in the way. And then the worker says, so you're someone who managed to drink a good bit, according to what you've told me, and it never interferes with your work or family life. So you've amplified it, you've exaggerated a little bit, and the purpose of it is for the person, well, no, I'm not saying it never gets in my way. It's just that, because, okay, so you see where it's going. The difficulty is because it's amplified, it's because it's exaggerated, it can come off sarcastic. And so that's the caveat, that's the concern that I would have in doing it. But you can really tell when it would work. And then a double-sided reflection. And the double-sided reflection really captures that ambivalence. So on one hand, you want to take this job because it pays $2 an hour more. But on the other hand, you're not sure you're going to be able to do it. Or on the other hand, it's a harder commute to get there, right? The double-sided. And that can be really useful in helping individuals understand their ambivalence. And what's useful at this point is that decision balance worksheet. To talk about the good things about what's going on now and the bad things about what's going on now, the good things about changing and the not so good. And if people are in the actively considering doing something, then this can be a really good tool. The advantage of any kind of pencil and paper sheet, worksheet, etc., is that it's just hard to keep track of stuff in our brains, in our heads. So I'm going to stop again and ask another one of those "so what else" questions, in that in terms of helping people who think that they might want to make a change but aren't sure, ambivalence. What else have you found to be useful in that situation?
All right, we have one that's come in, giving them some suggestions or options that they may be able to choose from. Another says, ask what the consequences are if they do not change and have them reflect on a worst case scenario.
Yeah, that second one can be can be really helpful, because that again is that kind of challenging. Help me understand. You know, and also it can be useful to think about in terms of the proposed change. Okay, so if you do this, what's the worst thing that can happen? If you don't do this, what's the worst thing that can happen? Because often with the thinking about the worst thing that could happen about a possible change, is that might be exaggerated in the client's mind, or what the worker can do in saying, well, okay, if you were to do that, to take this new job and it turned out that it didn't work, and then you're without a job again. Okay, so if that were to happen, then what are some steps you could take, right? Could you still be able to get back the job or a similar job that you had now? Could you do that? And so really to help people to think about the negatives of staying put, and also to work through the negatives of making the change.
All right, we've got a few more.
Okay.
Asking what the advantages are of continuing the current behavior as it has perceived benefits, even though there may be negative consequences. Looking back at their past accomplishments and showing them that they are able. One person states that they like to ask people what or where they would like to see themselves in 10 years. It helps them to see where they want to go instead of focusing on where they have been. And they like to look at where they would like to be and from where they can kind of build towards. And then developing the goals together rather than telling the client the goals. Right.
And all of those are good things. All of those are really good things to do. I think that idea of looking at present behaviors in terms of where that could get them, certainly building on past accomplishments, because I think often sometimes people don't take that into account. They're just not very good at focusing on their strengths. I mean, I think the way humans are wired, we pay more attention to the things that don't work than the things that do work. And so reminding that and affirming that behavior. I want to add something here, and if I've mentioned this in another webinar, that's just the way it is. But when I mentioned doing groups for men with domestic abuse, and this was doing that, I think, shortly after the book, The Strengths Perspective, came out, and we were just starting in social work to pay attention to strengths, and I found that just really valuable. And so I was doing a good bit of affirming when people talked about, and they talked about that in the last week that they almost lost it in terms of getting into an argument or resorting to violence, and were able to pull back, or other kinds of things. And so I was, trying to affirm those behaviors. And my co-group leader, a social worker who had been doing this for a while, said, Jim, a lot of these guys, you look at them and they're kind of surprised when you say that, because they didn't get a lot of affirmations when they're growing up. They certainly don't get it much in their jobs. They may not be getting it in the relationship that they've got. So I think when we can help people to look at what they've done well and what they are doing well, that really is a motivator for moving forward. Are there other ones, Rachel?
That is it for now.
Okay. So thinking about ambivalence, that can happen all through the change process, right? People really at any step can say, okay, what do I want to do? Or do I want to continue further? Or do I want to just say this is good enough? So I think it's nothing that gets resolved in general, because it's just part of the human experience, and that it will almost always be with us. It'll pop up here and there. I was putting this together and just thinking about that, and Okay, remind me again why we had children, right? Um, Almost all of us who are parents will continue doing that, even though there are times when you think that, why did I do this? Why did we do this, right? It's just the nature of ambivalence. But in the context of case management, I think that the concept and then the specific pieces that I've gone through can be helpful with those who are stuck and do not see a reason to change, to help them to be ambivalent about it, help them think, well, maybe, perhaps, and then to help those who are considering or planning changes to resolve or work through their ambivalence so they can really, because once people have said, okay, yes, yeah, I guess I am going to do that, then they can put the energy into it, and that increases the likelihood that they'll be successful. So as we conclude, we've still got a few minutes. I don't know if there's any other questions that people have about this topic or questions related to it.
If you have any questions regarding ambivalence or the topic and the webinar, please go ahead and type those in now. And we'll go through those as they come in. All right, we have one question so far. How do you balance not taking it going too fast when you have a client who's ambivalent with the expectations from funders or program requirements, particularly in a shelter situation, I'm guessing they're referring to, where you have to get people kind of in and out or stable in a certain time frame?
I think some of that has to do with well, let me go to a shelter situation, okay? And let me use the example of a 90-day shelter, because that was the one that I worked with. So 90 days isn't much time. They actually reformulated it as a 30-day shelter with the possibility of 2 extensions, because they found when it was a 90-day shelter, people really didn't want to. Some people didn't really want to do much for the first month and a half or so. But people come into a shelter, they come into a program, the first week may just be adjustment depending on what they've been doing. So there may be, like I say, they may be signing up for a program or 2. I think after that, one of the things is that there needs to be some homework. There need to be some tasks every week. And really depending on all those things that make clients different one from the other, some people are going to be going faster than others, but everybody people need to be doing something every week. And then what you're trying to do then is to help people build a sense of momentum, and then to be reinforcing as they're completing things, and then hoping with that the speed will pick up.
All right, we have another question asking if it's ever good to use self-disclosure, of your own story when working with someone who's ambivalent.
The answer is it all depends. Because so the question was self-disclosure. I think self-disclosure can be very powerful. Part of what it depends on what kind of clients. People who work in criminal justice or with people with criminal backgrounds often say absolutely no self-disclosure because people are manipulative. I think that packaging self-disclosure about yourself in a way where you can do it quickly enough to where it can go back to the client themselves, that can be useful. I think the other thing that's akin to self-disclosure is to tell stories about similar clients in that situation, with ambivalence. If it's in a shelter, so there was a woman who was in here last spring, and you tell her story. And I think that both your story and that person's story, but especially the client who's been in a similar situation, can be useful in helping people see a path ahead.
right, next question is, when a program is client commitment based, such as Pathway of Hope, how do we keep them motivated enough to complete the program and not give up?
Rachel, that's a pretty big question, right?
That's the question everybody has.
That's the question everybody has, yeah. I think that one of the answers, and it's a big question, so there's a lot of answers to that. I think one of the answers is helping people to understand the progress they're making. Client self-sufficiency scale gives you some information on that. I think that also just the affirmations, the advantage of doing tasks every week and putting those in your case notes, so then you can refer back and you can show the person that this was what they were doing and here's all the things they've done in the last 3 weeks of the last month. I think those help. But then I think also just that sense of working with the ambivalence when it comes. Because I think one thing with Pathway of Hope, and this is in talking to people who do that, is one of the challenges of the program is that people make a little bit of progress and they think, oh, that's enough, right? Things are better. I don't need to continue with this, especially because it's a lot of work. And so that's another kind of ambivalence of just between things being a little better and the possibility that things could be more better. I don't know if that's good English, but I think you understand what I mean. And so you're really just trying to use some of the things that have come out in this webinar in terms of helping clients with that.
All right, that's all the questions we had come in. If anyone has one, shoot it in right away. We'll wait like one more minute-ish. Well,
while we're waiting for that, let me just say, and I can say this and then come back to the question. When you get the PowerPoint, when Rachel sends you that PowerPoint, look at it, think about the work you're doing, and then to say, are there any of these things that I'm going to try to build in? It's a lot of stuff, and I don't expect anybody to try to do all of it. But thinking about your own style, your own work, the people you work with, and saying, are there a piece or two of this that I think I could use? And then keep doing those and practice and see how well they work.
All right, I think we're all done with questions. We didn't have any other ones come through, so we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. So thank you, Dr. Winship, for this presentation, and thanks everyone for joining us. Like we said, we'll get you copies of the slides and the link to the recording if you want to review it again early next week. And as you're exiting, please make sure you complete that quick survey and make sure you type in the names of everyone who participated at your computer, so we make sure everybody gets credit and we have accurate attendance. So thanks so much, everyone.
Take care.